Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to EduTalks Modern Literature. My name is Rifka Rajbiwati, and I'm your host today. It's such an honor to welcome you in this special event. How far do you know about literature nowadays? I know. You are here. I'm sure you must be a literature enthusiast. On this special event, we will have a special guest and literature specialist. But first, it's time for us to sing Indonesian anthem, Indonesia Raya. Please stand up. Thank you. You may sit down. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. He is a phenomenal, successful professor who has worked with many universities around the world, educating by telling us great stories about literature. But before that, we have to inviting our moderator for the discussion today. Please welcome our lovely teacher, Mrs. Susana Widyastuti.
Good morning, everybody. Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Villa Kulil and I'm the Director General of NORAD. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to NORAD's traditional conference in December. As last year, we have filled the SAS Radisson to its absolute rim. I would like to extend an especially warm welcome to our distinguished guests, many of whom have traveled far to be with us today. I would now like to invite our first speaker, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Børge Brende, to the podium. The topic to be discussed here today are high on the Minister's agenda. In fact, he will present a white paper on human rights to Parliament tomorrow. Mr. Brende, please.
Good morning. There is an English expression, to make the world a different place. That means to make the world better. It is hard to say if works of literature create better worlds, but they definitely do create different worlds. Now, the short answer to the question and title of this presentation, what truth does literature reveal to us, is the difference. Of course, people use literature in different ways. Some people look for a role model that they would imitate throughout their lives. Others believe that literature is just a beautiful way of putting things that everybody knows. Somebody might quote the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who said that poetry and drama are just ways of imitation, or mimesis. he doesn't mean that literature simply copies reality. In fact, he means that literature evokes, poetry and drama in this case, evokes recognition. We recognize certain things. So a work of art or a work of literature conveys to each one of its viewers, readers, or listeners, what you see is not different from you. It is identical. It is identical to you. What you see is actually yourself. Recognition and identification. On the other hand, I believe Leo Tolstoy created his Anna Karenina for us not to imitate her suicide. I think the reason is quite the opposite. When we see a gun pointed at us from the screen, we don't flee. We don't rush on stage when some danger is menacing a character in a theater play, right? Well, the same is true definitely about literature. It creates distance, and this distance is really important for what the old ancient Greeks call catharsis, the purgation of the soul from anxiety, the relief from strong emotions. This is when we're in high spirits, when the hero or heroine is dying in a tragedy. Now, it is somewhat paradoxical and ironic that in contemporary world, it is mostly mass popular culture that exploits imitation and identification. I still believe there is a great difference between pulp fiction and serious literature. And here is one of the criteria of distinction. According to the theorist of culture and writer Umberto Eco, the consumers of bestsellers and soap operas look for the same things. They look for repetition. Have a look at this. A beautiful scent. Do you recognize some of these characters? That's the intended effect of mass literature. So familiar features, familiar clothes, familiar manner to speak, familiar way to walk. These are the things that the viewers or readers are supposed to recognize. Consumers savor the endless, infinite repetition of the same, essentially the same story. Now, mass culture does not stress difference, it welcomes identity. In the works of Shakespeare, Proust, Kafka, T.S. Eliot, Pasternak, Tolstoy, you're not going to find a lot of identity and imitation. You're going to find a lot of difference. These works create alternative scenarios. And even if in some elements these works might resemble our reality, upon the whole, they open up an opportunity of a different way of thinking, of a different life, of a different world. In the words of Russian poet Boris Pasternak, who tried to identify the sources of poetic imagination and inspiration, we stop recognizing reality. It appears in some new aspect. This aspect seems to us its own, not our own condition. Beside this condition, everything else in the world has a name. It alone is new and nameless. We try to give it a name, art comes out. Now I would like to give two very different illustrations of what I have described perhaps too metaphorically. And the first one is Vladimir Nabokov's English language masterpiece, Lolita. So this is a story about Humbert Humbert. His name sounds like ombre in French, which means shadow. So he's sort of a shadowy, dark character. Humbert Humbert marries a widowed woman in order to have an affair with her 12-year-old daughter, Dolores, or Lolita, as Humbert calls her. Now this book, among other interesting things, of course, is it is a book about child abuse. Despite that, many careful readers and experienced critics are reported to have ended up sympathizing with Humbert while reading the book. They're really touched by his sensitivity, by his sufferings. He describes himself as a tangle of thorns. They're moved by his passionate love for Lolita. He truly loves her. And also this love is unrequited, because definitely the little girl doesn't share his feelings. And these readers are also fascinated by the final repentance in the end of the book for having ruined Lolita's life. Moreover, such readers tend to denigrate Lolita as a typical teenager, wayward, vulgar, interested in nothing else than, say, magazines for teenagers and sweets. Some people even call her actual seductress. What such readers do not understand, what they overlook, is that ruthless and cunning persistence with which Humbert makes Lolita satisfy his desires. He makes her his slave, his prisoner. And moreover, what is especially interesting is that he describes all this in precision and with great cynicism. So imagine you're in passion. Can you describe everything that you feel or see cynically? No, you can't. So these readers are disoriented in their judgment by the strong emotions that Humbert projects. It's a weird combination of self-pity, refined cynicism, and brutal force. But doesn't something like this sometimes happen to us in reality, when some people, consciously or not, try to impose their ideas, their thoughts, their intentions on us in order to make us behave the way they like, not the way we want? Does that happen? I believe Lolita is about the danger of identification with the fictional character. The correct understanding of this book would be exactly not to identify with the main character. Actually, this is what he wants from us. He wants our sympathy. He wants us to sympathize with him, to empathize. But that would be a sympathy for a criminal. Now, the second example I'd like to give, it's very different, but you know this very well. Two, it's Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. This book also provides an alternative scenario of the famous story of Pontius Pilate and Jesus that you know in the Gospels. And in this novel, Bulgakov challenges our perception of divinity. Now his Jesus figure, his Christ figure, called Yeshua in the novel, is very different from the traditional biblical representation of God. Actually, he doesn't look like God. He's meek and very human. But at the same time, he is the paragon of difference, change, and otherness. Well, he says to Pilate, who is lonely, who is suffering from a headache, you're closed off. You lost faith in people. Your life is impoverished. You have to change your ways. And indeed, Pilate has no other choice. He cannot escape changing his ways. He has two options. One, he could liberate Yeshua, who is condemned, who is convicted of an insult to the Roman emperor in a fabricated denunciation. But that would mean that Pilate himself is in danger. His career definitely would be ruined, and perhaps his life. The other option that he has, and which he actually chooses, is to send Yeshua to death. But then he is tormented by the pangs of remorse until the end of his life and even after life. So I believe the way Bulgakov challenges our perception of divinity is exactly this well, Yeshua is a meek and humane figure, right? It is exactly in this severe and radical unsettling of Pilate's life that divinity manifests itself. Many people think that God is someone out there, someone who could grant us our desires and wishes. We pray to God and He gives us comfortable life, income, and things like this. But it is not always true. For example, in the Vedic tradition, the Indian gods are sometimes referred to as Puram Dara, which means the destroyer of cities or the destroyer of bodies. City and body here are metaphors for different constructions that humans erect in order to protect themselves from the unknown, from life, if you will. So perhaps God is not really the one who grants us our wishes, but someone who disrespects such constructions, who smites them and annihilates these constructions. I think this interpretation is really close. Well, it applies very well to the image of Bulgakov's Pilate, because he cannot escape the encounter with Yeshua. And this encounter changes his life in a most radical way, and moreover, in the way nobody could predict, in the way Pilate could never have imagined for himself. These are just two examples, of course. Many more could be cited from dozens of works of literature. But now to sum it up, it is true that identification and imitation are very powerful forces. They're very important faculties that we have as living beings. For example, mutual understanding, emotional understanding, empathy simply would not be possible if we didn't have the ability to imitate. Some scientists today believe that thanks to imitation, we are able to learn very complex technical skills. So imitation is the way how we transmit technical knowledge. However, the extreme of imitation and identification is sameness. Art, and especially literature, thanks to irony, ambiguity, creates diversity, difference. A wonderful illustration of it you can see here in this brilliant painting by Van Gogh. It challenges all possible expectations. But this distance and difference that literature creates is not the distance of alienation or estrangement. Not at all. Rather, it helps us understand the world more objectively, because this distance and difference and change that literature causes eliminate our self-delusions, our myths about ourselves that preclude us from seeing the world as it really is. So in this case, by creating difference, I think we can really say that literature does make the world a different place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Susanna, as the moderator, and Mr. Daniel, as our speaker today, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And the audience, please once more giving applause to them. Well, that's wrap up our event today. On behalf of our college, Yogyakarta State University, the sponsor, the committees, and also all of the audience, thank you for making time to join us here today. It has been my pleasure to host in this event. We look forward to seeing you at the next year's event. Hope you will travel safely home, stay safe and healthy. Goodbye.